Okay, it's showtime. Paul, I see you're in the chat, or you were. That's, I don't know if you can tell, but that's a Nintendo star on the Christmas tree, but it's so bright the camera can't really pick it up. I'll send Paul a picture of that later. Okay. Oh, yeah. All right. Yeah. So for everybody joining, that's my Nintendo star right up there on the small fake tree. It's the power up star. And there's going to be a cat chewing on that tree in the background, but I thought we'd have some festive time. Let's start getting into it. Hold on a second. Share screen. Yeah, here we go. Okay. Let's do this.
Problems with content ranging from introductory
All right, skip.
often. Welcome to Reason and Theology, everyone. Your host, Michael, on a Saturday afternoon.
I
we
don't
have
need
a
their
very
chat
special
replay.
guest, Father Michael Nazir-Ali, former Bishop of Rochester, Anglican Bishop of Rochester, who was recently received into the Catholic Church and ordained as a priest, received through the Ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham. And in addition to that, we're also joined by William Albrecht and Eric Ibarra, who are also co-hosting with me today. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. How are you all? And especially Father Michael, how are you?
Yes, very well, thank you. I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you very well. Eric, how are you?
I'm doing excellent. Been a long break. It's good to be back on the.
Doing great. Thrilled to gonna have a great time.
I'm
Thrilled.
just skipping over.
Yeah, it's
I'm
privilege. You know, Father Michael, I really want to hear about your background prior to your conversion into the Catholic Church. Tell me a little bit about your background, how you became Anglican, or unless you were, born into the Anglican communion, and how you became an Anglican bishop.
Yes, thank you. Well, that's a long story. I mean,
it sure
might be
is.
here all night.
Right.
Yeah, I come from a Shia Muslim family. My father was baptized in a very well-known Anglican church, actually, which had been built by a Muslim noblewoman who had been healed as a result of seeing a vision of Jesus. I mean, as far as I know, she never formally became a Christian, but she built this church in Thanksgiving. And so I was brought up with him, of course, as a baptized believer, and with most of the family Shia Muslim, which most of them still are. And we had to find our own place in all of that. I came to a renewed and a sort of living faith, as it were, at university through the work of an Anglican chaplain who was working there. This was at the University of Karachi, my first university. And religious leaders were actually forbidden from coming onto the campus. And that was not, even then, that was not an anti-Christian move. It was to prevent radical Islamists from coming onto the campus. So you may ask, well, how did he get on? And the answer is he registered as a postgraduate student. And
good missionaries will find a way.
They had to let him in. But he gave us a model for ministry, gave me certainly a model for ministry, that nothing was impossible. You could always do something to exercise what God had given you to do. And so I went to the UK to study at Cambridge, and then do some research at Oxford, and then some teaching in Cambridge, and then went back to Pakistan, to my original diocese, and then to another diocese there to work and to teach. And eventually I became a bishop there. When I became a bishop, it is said, I'm not sure how I can confirm this, but it is said I was the youngest in the Anglican communion at the time. And then I came to Britain because I got into difficulties with radical Islamists for various reasons.
That would be interesting.
And Robert Runcie, who was then the Archbishop of Canterbury, invited me to do some work with him for the Lambeth Conference of 1988. And so eventually I ended up as the Bishop of Rochester, which of course is St. John Fisher's see. And also Erasmus lived there for a long time because he was a friend of Fisher's. So yeah, that's about it, I think.
Yeah. So let me also ask this, and then I'm going to also pass it on to Eric and William. What exactly made you start to look elsewhere outside of Anglicanism? What were kind of the seeds that were planted there?
Well, that's a good question. Well, as you know, the Anglican.
All right, I already watched this video. You're not going to hear anything about the gospel. But he brings up justification kind of towards the end, kind of around the 55-minute mark. So just want to throw that out there.
Communion has been in crisis now for some time. And I have been a member of the Anglican Roman Catholic International Commission for a long time, which was set up by Pope Paul VI and Archbishop Michael Ramsey of Canterbury explicitly to remove the obstacles to full communion between Anglicans and the Catholic Church.
Okay, anyone on a commission in trying to remove obstacles to full communion has got some gospel issues to begin with, because it has to start with the repeal of the Council of Trent. Okay? And that's something Rome can't do. So just throwing that out there. I'm not saying he's not solid on the Trinity, or he didn't stand up to Muslim extremists, or he doesn't have he's really diehard about the deity of Christ or anything. But even from his Anglican days, you can see the issues there.
So we worked very hard on this, my predecessors and also colleagues who worked with me, and for over many years. And we produced a number of agreements on the Eucharist, on the ministry, on authority in the church, on the Blessed Virgin Mary, on moral questions, addressing one by one things that we felt could be obstacles to unity. But what I discovered was that when we produced these agreements, and sometimes on some of those agreements, both the Catholic Church and the Anglican Communion said that it reflected their faith. Some part of the Anglican Communion would then go and do its own thing, particularly in the United States and Canada, but not only there. And this then jeopardized the agreements themselves, because the Catholic Church understandably said, how can you produce this agreement when someone then goes and does the opposite? That made me think. I was in any case uncomfortable with some of the things that were being done without proper authority. And so I came to the conclusion that the church needed three things. The church needed a system where, if decisions were made that affected everyone, that they could be actually implemented, they could be made to stick.
Need someone to make the trains run on time.
Secondly, we needed a church where there was a sufficient body of teaching to which appeal can be made when that is needed. On questions of personhood, of human life, its beginning and its end, and what is in between, marriage and the family, social justice, freedom of belief, all of those things. And then thirdly, because there was no one to make decisions when the need arose in the Anglican Communion, I came to see that an adequate teaching authority was needed. that could intervene and from time to time guide the faithful about the way that they should take, rather than leaving them to their own devices. I'm not saying that this should be promiscuous, such intervention is not constantly needed, but it is needed from time to time. And looking at the history of the church, there is really only one candidate for that job. It's the primacy of the Bishop of
I could be a candidate for that job.
Rome, properly exercised to keep churches and the faithful in fellowship with one another.
All right, I got to make a few comments here. If you haven't watched my video on the psychology of Catholic converts, you really need to go watch that, because it is completely in play here, which is there's all these people disagreeing and it's bothering me and I can't control everything. This is textbook what I was talking about. Now, we're going to see later some interesting wrinkles kind of with this guy, but that's textbook what it is here. It's like, well, the Pope is the best candidate, is the only candidate to be basically dictator. And so or control everybody. By the way, go look at James Martin's Twitter feed from today. That's all I'm saying. I retweeted it. So that's all I'm saying. He's going to mention Benedict a lot in this video. He's not going to mention Pope Francis a lot. That's another thing I need to say. The other thing I wanted to mention, and this is more from, hey, Lionel, what you doing? What's up, buddy? The other thing I need to mention, though, is my background in computers, in terms of how you create a network. And bear with me, this is going somewhere. You can have degrees of centralization and decentralization. Now, they are bemoaning the problems with decentralization. But what they aren't doing is coming to grips with the benefits of decentralization and the problems with centralization. What I mean by that? What I mean by that is if having a monarchy in the church is good if the monarch is good and if the monarch is defending good things. But if the monarch has a problem, the rot is total and over the whole system. All right, so the history of Israel kind of shows this too. Okay, the problem with decentralization is that everybody does what's right in their own eyes. The problem with the monarchy is that evil kings corrupt the whole nation. So which one's better? It depends what problem you're trying to solve, and it depends how good your king is. So from a computer perspective, like say you have the internet was built so there would be no single node point of failure. So in my estimation, from how God has worked stuff out in history, is God does not want the gospel to be snuffed out. So God would rather have multiple points that can fail, but can't be corrupted by one choke point, namely the papacy. And what we also see with the papacy is that it can't, once, or with Roman Catholicism, is that once it centralizes something, or once it dogmatizes something, it can't correct itself. So the downside for decentralization is that you can't whip everybody into line. The plus side is that the whole thing doesn't go rotten. So they always mention the downside of decentralization without mention the upside, if that makes sense. There's probably a few other points I should make there, but let's keep going.
Excellent. Now, I do have some follow-up questions, but I'm definitely going to pass it over first to William, let him ask some,
Okay.
and then Eric, and then we'll come back.
Sure.
So
Father-
thank you for that. Yeah.
Father Michael, what an incredible blessing it is to be here with you. Just really thrilled that you're here. You're really hearing everything that you've been saying is just incredible. I did want to ask you, and if I do need to speak up, let me know. But I do want to ask you, other than authority, other than the primacy of authority, was there anything else that maybe helped push you towards Catholicism?
Now, I love this question because what William Albrecht is trying to do is kind of fish for something, okay? And whatever version of Anglicanism and Catholicism he is in, it's a very post-Vatican II Catholicism. So he's not going to say, yeah, I figured out the first pope was actually Peter. No, that's not going to be the answer he gets.
At all?
Oh, yes. I mean, many things. There is, well, I mean, there was, first of all, the question of ministry that the Anglican Communion has claimed since Henry VIII's time that it continues the ministry of the whole church. The ordinals explicitly say that. Now, of course, there's been a debate about that, and the Catholic Church has made its own judgment on Anglican ministry and so on. But for me, questions began to arise when Anglicans began to do things to the ministry, like admitting women, for instance, to the priesthood and the episcopate.
Yeah.
Which changed the nature of that ministry
Granted, that's a problem.
without consultation with those churches that also claim to have this ministry. And I was on the staff of Archbishop Ramsey, as I was saying, when there was impassioned dialogue between Pope Paul VI, Pope John Paul II, Cardinal Willebrands, with Archbishop Ramsey, pleading with him not to allow such a step to be taken because it would jeopardize the archic agreement on ministry. Because, I mean, the argument was you can't claim to share this ministry with us and then go and do something unilaterally. So I think the question of sacramental and teaching assurance arose for me and for other people in quite a sharp way. The other question was about the sacraments themselves. I mean, I've been increasingly uncomfortable over many years about the teaching that there are only two sacraments, baptism and the Eucharist, and that the others may be called sacramental or they may be called corrupt practices of the church or whatever, but they're not sacraments. Now, of course, baptism and the Eucharist have a special place as sacraments of the gospel, no doubt. But take marriage. I mean, marriage is not just a creation ordinance, but in the New Testament, it is raised to be a sacrament. It's the only thing, by the way, that's called a sacrament in the New Testament. In terms of the sacraments that we have, it is called the mysterion, which is the Greek word for sacrament. In Ephesians 5.
That's a pretty weak case. I guess define what a sacrament is first, but like, oh, there's 7 sacraments. I'm not buying this. At least in Reformed theology. I'm not sure about Anglican, but in Reformed theology, a sacrament or an institution laid down by Christ So, okay. What's that mean? Like, his point here is kind of, oh, they're seven, whatever. It doesn't really matter.
32, and it is a sacrament of the
I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but on the list of priorities you could have,
relationship between Christ and his church. Okay, so
yeah, there's a typology between marriage and Christ and his church. How does that make it a sacrament?
so why is marriage not a sacrament?
Because it wasn't instituted by Christ.
Ordination. Jesus breathing on the disciples on the day, remember, of the resurrection, and saying, receive the Holy Spirit. Whose sins you forgive, they are forgiven, and those that you retain are retained. Well, if that's not a sacrament, I don't know what is. So
maybe because you're reading a bunch of theology into that statement that is wrong.
So clearly, ordination is a sacrament. And so, you can argue healing, the sacrament of reconciliation and healing. That was the task in St. Mark's
If healing is a sacrament, shouldn't it always work? Ex opera operato?
gospel. The apostles, recently chosen by him, were sent out to heal people and to anoint them with oil. I mean, that's our Lord's command.
Yeah.
So that's a sacrament. So yeah, I mean, I think the inadequacy of Anglican teaching and of the Reformation Church is generally about the sacraments is certainly something that made me uncomfortable, and to look for a fuller teaching of the nature of the sacraments and their extent.
And Father Michael, you do bring up a number of very good points there. When we look at the Bible, everything you're pointing out there does make a lot of sense. And I wonder, as you delved into the Bible, you really pondered on these incredible truths that we can glean from Holy Writ. Did you also
William
perhaps
Albrecht always makes me laugh how he asks
look into
questions.
early
He could,
church
like-
history? And did that
I'm
help
sorry.
push you
I shouldn't.
more and more towards Catholicism? Because I know, according to your background, you are a very educated man. I imagine you were already aware of early church history.
He's fishing. He's fishing here, like. But this post-Vatican II guy here isn't going to give him what he wants.
But perhaps maybe you began to delve into it more and more, and maybe something stuck out. Did anything in early church history play a part in moving you more and more towards the fullness of the faith?
Well, yes. I mean, Anglicans pride themselves on being patristic, and to read the fathers, to understand the fathers, and so on, and also the early councils of the church. But a remark actually that Pope Benedict made, I'm not quite sure when he made it, but he
Pope
said
which, not
that,
Francis?
you don't just have to believe the creeds produced by the councils, you also have to consider the faith of the church that produced those creeds. So it's not just the Nicene formula that you look at, but you think, well, what was the faith of the church or of the churches that produced this creed?
The Nicene Church
So that,
didn't believe in the papacy.
obviously, interventions from time to time.
Rome just
by the
had a
Bishop of
political
Rome to determine the faith of the church.
thing.
The tome of Leo that determined the situation for the church at Chalcedon about the nature of Christ is for the church from time to time by the Bishop of Rome to determine the faith of the church. The tome of Leo that determined.
I think he said by the time of Leo. Let's check that again.
To determine the faith of the church, the tome of Leo.
Time of Leo,
Determined
Leo.
the situation for the church at Chalcedon about the natures of Christ.
Yeah. When's Chalcedon? Is that 5th century? When's Leo? Leo is about 5th century, maybe 6th century. So he knows there's not an early papacy. He's not saying it, but I really know he knows there's not an early papacy.
Christ is a
I mean, he was in all those Anglican discussions with the Vatican. He knows there's not an early papacy, and he knows his counterparts in Rome who are knowledgeable don't know there's not an early papacy either.
is a very good example of something from the early church. But I mean, as early as the letters of Ignatius, the structure of particular churches, of bishops, presbyters, deacons uniting with the faithful in one Eucharist,
Hold on,
an
let's back up.
understanding of the incarnation of deacons unite. I mean, as early as the letters of Ignatius, the structure of particular churches, of bishops, presbyters, deacons uniting with the faithful
Okay, so I think he's got a threefold division there.
in one Eucharist, an understanding of the incarnation, of the importance of the Blessed Virgin in that. I mean,
There's you can see the importance of the Blessed Virgin, and by the time of Ignatius,
all of that is very early.
Yeah.
And certainly influenced me.
Notice he didn't mention the papacy there.
I do want to ask you one more question, Father Michael, then pass it over to my brother Eric. And that would be, in England right now, it is not a particularly explosive time to become Catholic. The parishes are not as full as they once were. People by and large in England, not only England, but in Europe, are really not practicing the faith like we would want them to do. My question to you, Father, would be, in England, what can be done to bring back that incredible, vibrant love for the Catholic faith, to fill the churches again? I know this because I've got near and dear friends that live in England that tell me, look, we don't even know when there are holy days of obligation to go to Mass. We go to Mass and, it's virtually empty there. Whereas over here in the US, of course, it's a very different thing. What can be done in England?
I don't know where William Albrecht is. Church attendance is probably way higher here than in Europe. But the vast majority of Catholics I know, maybe it's because I'm in the Northeast, I'm pretty liberal. And those who are religious aren't near, I mean, the amount of trads are probably 5-10% if you're lucky in some congregations. Nah, I wouldn't even say 10. I'd probably say 5 at best. You see the people who, there's going to be a handful of people with like Catholic radio sort of bumper stickers on. But I think William Albrecht is overstating how good the American church, and I'm not throwing stones here. Okay. It like, oh, look at how good the Protestant churches are. I'm sure Europe is worse.
To bring back that fire in the belly for the faith, if you will.
Yeah, I think the emptiness of churches in England can be exaggerated, to be honest. I mean, there are some churches that are very full.
Sure.
And the Catholic Church in England now has pulled ahead of the Anglican Church in terms of attendance.
Not that impressive, probably.
For what that's worth. But I agree with you. I think one of the challenges for Western Europe as a whole, and also maybe Canada, is to make the Christian faith credible.
Yeah.
Once again, it is the best.
I had a conversation with someone yesterday, and I was talking about UFOs with him because he stumbled on my channel, and someone I knew, or he went to the channel, and taking the paranormal stuff seriously, it was new to him. If you told me, say, circa 1995, that the vast majority of people, you would have UFOs confirmed by the Department of Defense and most people don't even care. Okay. No, people don't care. They don't really care how to interpret it. They don't care if they're aliens. If they do mention it, I see a lot of, well, this is just trying to distract us from blah, blah, blah. So for years, but not, I don't want to get on a tangent on that. There's a great big apathy in the world. So he raises a good point about making it care, but like a lot of people just they don't care. And I think if people want to look down on him, that's fine. But I think the Ray Comfort Living Waters leading with the law of God is the proper way to do most evangelism. I mean, if somebody already is a broken sinner, that's one thing. But I think for the vast majority of people, especially in our day and age, you lead with the law. But again, if you're Roman Catholic, you don't have the gospel to give them.
A story that can be told for people to understand their situation, but it is very difficult to tell that story. I mean, you can hear every story on the media except this one.
Yeah.
And often the reason for that is that media people, politicians, public figures of various kinds have arranged their lives in such a way that what this story has to say is quite incorrect.
If Bill Albrecht ever watches this, Bill, I've watched a lot of videos where you have a closet door and a bare wall. Dude, I at least have a Nintendo star on my fake small little Christmas tree in the playroom. I don't have an impressive bookshelf. I mean, Michael Lofton looks like he doesn't read his books. Eric has a disheveled bookshelf. He at least looks like he reads them. But this looks more scholarly and impressive for the camera. Bill, you got to step up your game, man. You gotta maybe just put like a little teeny like bookshelf. Just put like 2 books on there. Okay, this is Christian YouTube. You gotta have books behind you, which I don't have. No, I do have 2 books behind me. All right, but they're not mine.
Convenient for them. That is something that is needing to be done. I've given a lot of my time, as you may know, if you've been looking at my profile, at being an apologist for I think we have reached that stage again where we need apologists for the Christian faith.
Definitely.
And one of the reasons I admire Pope Benedict so much is that he understood
Not
the
Francis.
Western European situation.
I don't think he ever mentions Francis
as well as the
this whole
contemporary
video.
situation, and could address it in a missionary way.
Father Michael, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much, and I look forward to dialoguing with you again in a moment. But I do want to pass it on over to my brother Eric, who I know is very excited to talk with you.
Hi, Father Michael. Is my audio coming in at least?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good, great. I'm delighted to have you on Reason in Theology. And when you mentioned Michael Ramsey and Rowan Williams, it brought some nostalgia to me because I was a former Anglican, but I was part of the Continuum, the Anglican province of America. So it was over here. I was up on the northeast side of the United States, and Michael Ramsey's book, the Gospel in the Catholic Church, is a classic text that I've always admired. And Rowan Williams, I deeply appreciated a lot of his contribution, especially to Eastern.
Is he giving his Anglican bona fides here?
He had some books on the dealing with Eastern Christianity. But one of the things that brought me out of the Anglican Church, what brought me into the Anglican Church was I was trying to find a via media, where I didn't want to throw away all of history, and at the same time, I didn't want to stick.
Protestantism is throwing away all of history. You know what? I would rather be with the proverbial snake handlers. Maybe I don't want to handle the snake myself, than in Roman Catholicism. I'm getting tired of these people who are just look down at the. It gets frustrating. For all the flaws that the church that only has 50 years worth of history, or up to Billy Graham or something, they're still part of the church. If the gospel is still preached, they're still baptizing, and they're granted I'm Presbyterian, so but whatever, but they're baptizing and they're preaching the word. They're having communion. Are they exercising church discipline? I'd rather be in that than look at James Martin's timeline and realize what's really the case with Roman Catholicism today, even if I didn't have my bugaboo with justification by faith alone.
My neck out for certain doctrines that the Catholic Church made dogmatic, So I tried to find a happy middle in the Anglican Church, but what I learned,
and I'm seeing Barely Protestants comment there. I've been defending more Anglicanism in the last few weeks than I should as a Presbyterian. But I'm not saying throw out church history or anything like that. Just make it subservient to Scripture.
Is that something that St. John Henry Newman had learned?
Oh, here comes the Newman.
With the Oxford movement and all of his goings back and forth with his peers, is that even the most historically rooted Protestantism, as much as we can admire it's impossible to sustain a dogmatic character, long-lasting doctrines. Did that?
I'm not sure what that means, but yeah, faithful churches die out over time. I mean, the Pharisees are still around in Orthodox Judaism, so longevity doesn't mean anything to me.
And Newman have any impact on you and your insights into the transition that you've made?
Yes, Newman is very important. Particularly on the question of the development of doctrine. But let me say this.
So based on what he said earlier, and especially with the development of doctrine, I'm really sure that Nazir-Ali, that's my cat. Sorry for that noise. I'm pretty sure Nazir-Ali thinks the papacy is a development.
Michael Ramsey, The Gospel in the Catholic Church, is a very good understanding of the church. With Archbishop Rowan Williams, I think what you have to say is that it's not enough to know orthodoxy, you also have to follow orthodoxy. That is where I have a debate with him, because he espouses many radical causes that are contrary to the teaching of the church. I feel still that Anglicanism has two impetuses, if that's the right word. I think there was an impetus towards a greater discovery of Catholicity. There always has been,
I'm not sure what that means. Like a discovery of Catholicity. I'm not sure how they're defining that.
the 1549 prayer book, Elizabeth herself in many different ways, James I, Archbishop Laud, the Caroline Divines, and of course the Oxford movement. But there is the opposite impetus as well, which is greater fragmentation and a tendency to lurch towards Protestantism in that way. And what we have now, I think what's happened now is that tendency, the latter tendency, has triumphed. So the Anglican Communion will look more and more like a liberal Protestant denomination.
And so is Rome.
Now I certainly regret that. I'm sure you will as well. But that is how it is, and that must give pause for thought for people who regard it as a via media. I have thought that myself, and
nobody's safe. Okay, the Mormons are going south, of all people, on sexual issues. You can see with the redefinition of the death penalty, that's clearly the death penalty is clearly allowed in Scripture, and clearly part of Roman Catholic tradition. Right? Just look at Bellarmine or something like that. So, if I can quote, one of my favorite quotes is Catholic theologian Raymond Brown, where it's that Rome does not change her stances in a blunt way. She requotes the past. She quotes the past with praise, and then I'm going to paraphrase from this point forward. But she basically puts her own spin on it, keeps what can be retained, and kind of moves forward. And then Raymond Brown applied that to how Rome changed her mind, changed how she did biblical exegesis within the last century. And where I think he said 97%, something like that, of the commentaries and things would never have been allowed 40 or 50 years prior. So like 1920s, something like that. So one of the ways liberals work, either in Roman Catholicism or in Protestantism, is they'll define something, they'll put out a statement, and I think you can clearly see this in Vatican II as well, that can be interpreted both ways by both groups, and then they kind of just get their way. So, and then there's the additional wrinkle of claims to infallibility in Roman Catholicism. So it's pretty easy to get your way. It's harder to get your way in one sense, because you have, these things were infallible and we can't change them. But it's easy in another sense, because what they do is just kind of redefine stuff. And then they just, so they redefine stuff. And then they just kind of, the people who recognize it's redefined or things have moved, just say, well, it's not dogmatic. But it becomes the new normal. So, standard, they should have learned that from the how the Protestant liberals worked. But they didn't, because they thought they were infallible. So the conservatives in the Catholic Church are at a disadvantage because they think they're infallible. So they're
But I don't
not
think
wise
it
to
is. If it ever was, I don't think it's tenable now.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's one of the reasons why I had to study more. I studied more history, and I spent a lot of time in prayer. And that brought me to the fork in the road between Byzantium and Rome, And in many ways, I wanted to go Eastern Orthodox because I thought it would be less, something about Orthodoxy and Anglicanism that they sometimes, some historians and theologians say they share is, they emphasize collegiality, majority, or things like that. But when it comes to final decision making,
Oh, here we go again.
we even see that problem in the Eastern Orthodox churches, and so
There is a very big concern. Again, go watch my video, Psychology of Catholic Converts, of making the trains run on time. That kind of the strongman tendency, the life is messy tendency. Life can't be messy. I got to have someone straighten everything out. In Protestant circles, this shows itself in the King James onlyness, where, oh no, there's multiple textual variants. What do? I freak out. It's only the King James. So it's common. It's a common human trait, but you see it a lot in Catholic converts.
So it's my story is not going to be said, but I came to the Catholic Church. Did Orthodoxy, Eastern Orthodoxy, or Oriental Orthodoxy, did any of those things show up on the radar in consideration in light of what seems like they're very constant in many ways with their faith. So
See,
your
constancy.
thoughts on
That's
that?
very important. Constancy.
Yes, well,
Not truth, constancy.
Many close friends.
I'm not saying
who
truth's
are
not.
Eastern or Oriental.
I know you're in the chat. I'm not saying you don't
value
think truth
my
is not
friendship very
important.
much. I work with the persecuted church, and of course, many of them are persecuted believers themselves in different parts of the world. Yeah, the first thing to say is that Catholics in the West need to.
All right. It is such a common theme among Catholic converts, I can't help but notice it. And I'm not against a live engagement. I'm just saying I'm just reacting to this video. That's the only purpose of this. Go again. After this is done, go watch my video on the psychology of Catholic converts. Catholic converts and Catholic apologists keep telling me this as a reason for leaving or a consideration. He's even saying it in this video. I can't ignore it just because you don't want it to be true. I'm not saying it's the only thing in play. There's multiple things in play, but you hear it over and over and over and over again. All right.
To be aware of the diversity of the Catholic Church. I mean, if you go to a country like Iraq, most of the Christians there are Catholic, but very few of them are Latin Catholic, if any. I mean, you've got Syrian Catholics, you've got Chaldeans, you may even have some Greek Catholics, but there are no Latin Catholics in Iraq. The same in Syria, and so on. So that diversity of the Catholic Church itself, which incorporates the Eastern traditions to a very great extent. I mean, think of the Maronites. We must acknowledge. With Orthodoxy, there are two things. I mean, one is the focus on ethnicity. So I was in a very critical
That's a good point.
war situation in one country, and I asked the leader of the Orthodox Church about his role in that conflict, and he said, well, I am the leader of the X people, one of the groups that was involved in the conflict. And I thought, well, if you're the leader of the X people, then you obviously can't play a role in reconciling the different groups involved in the conflict. The second point is about tradition. I have great respect for the way in which the Orthodox uphold tradition. And as I have great respect for Protestants who uphold the authority of Scripture. But the question is, how do you bring Scripture and tradition to bear on the new knowledge that is all around us and which is increasing day by day? So there is no Newman in Orthodoxy. Coming back to...
All right. Obviously, I have my problems with Newman. The historical novelty, the development of doctrine. Not historical novelty, but one thing they didn't ask for further clarification of, and I know you have limited time and that sort of thing, and you probably have a billion things running through your head. I have no idea what he means by new knowledge here. What new knowledge? What do you need to know new knowledge? So there's no ongoing revelation anymore. I think all parties would agree to that. But there's the blank check of will lead my church into all truth with no expiration date for when that gets fulfilled, I guess. So I think what that means is, what I think Nazir-Ali is trying to say here is that we're confronted with new situations. How do we apply it? But we don't have that. I mean, we can just say, well, Rome's guaranteed infallible, but we know there's only been a handful of dogmatic stations, and we know they've changed on the death penalty as of last few years. So we know that even in application, they're not infallible within the last 2,000 years or whatever. So, that's probably out of this whole interview, this is probably the piece I would want further clarification on, and also whether he actually believes there was an early papacy, which I'm pretty sure he doesn't believe in.
St. John Henry Newman. And I think the service that Newman has performed for the Catholic Church, which is seen on nearly every page of the documents of the Second Vatican Council, is how to come to grips with new knowledge in a principled way, so that on the one hand, you don't capitulate to it like the Anglicans and other denominations are doing. On the other hand, you don't just plead tradition.
How's that new knowledge if you don't capitulate to it? Does he mean new understanding? Is he using knowledge as like a euphemism or sarcastically, where it's not really knowledge?
And say, we believe in unchanged tradition. You come in a principled way to deal with new knowledge.
It's a lot easier just to do sola scriptura. And
so to reposition the church in respect of the contemporary world. I think that is why an effective primacy, which ought to be, I think, as collegial as it's possible to be, but nevertheless, an effective primacy is necessary.
He kind of reminds me, where Jerome mentions that the early church went down to a monarchical bishop from essentially a congregational or Presbyterian model in order to combat heresy. And there's nothing, I think, inherently wrong with that church government change development in stance to that. Now, again, as mentioned earlier, there's pros and cons. So and again, you can rewind the tape, but they never mention the pros to decentralization. They only mention the cons of decentralization and vice versa. So I think where he is at, I don't know for sure, but where he is at is that a further consolidation into a papacy to combat heresy, as opposed to under monarchical bishops, is kind of a prudential thing. That is a valid take, I think. But you have to admit the downsides. That, hey, we should structure like this because we're combating this. But that doesn't mean we have to do it. And that doesn't mean that's how the apostles set up the church.
Yeah, that reminds me of something that Pope Benedict XVI Emeritus, in one of the interviews that Peter Sewald did with him, and for him, all these terminologies like infallibility, development of doctrine, for him, he simplified it to just how does the church have the equipment to come to a final decision, and that for him that was like his summary on the church needs that equipment, so that way every decision is not open to fragmentation, in factions.
You see that again, the repeated concern about fragmentation. So
and things like that. But I think your statement on the development of doctrine is very important as well, because it's kind of
the development of doctrine is the development of doctrine.
Reminds me of the debate. You may have been familiar with the old Anglican Bishop Gore and John Chapman, Father John Chapman, from the late, it was the late 19th, early 20th century. And Father Chapman made that point about the Orthodox churches, that they could tend to have that characteristic of being fossilized, like almost like frozen, outwardly frozen, and not what seems to be, it requires new observations that require some sort of resurfacing of old questions, and making sure that there's continuity and yet development at the same time. That is, I think, key to the essay that Newman wrote. And so I appreciate your thoughts on how he influenced you in any way. The last question I have before I give it back to Michael is that one of the upsets that I have had as an Anglican coming into the Catholic Church is that the Catholic Church can almost seem like it's using the development of doctrine, perhaps almost to the extremity.
You think?
And so you have considerations from liberal bishops and liberals in the church, who are trying to make questionable what has always been understood as final and unquestionable.
It's called a development.
Has the recent aura in the Catholic Church where the development of doctrine, the Newman is being used perhaps in an abusive way? Have you noticed that?
You think?
And what are your thoughts on that as someone coming
Understated.
into the Catholic Church?
Yes, I mean, as I was saying, Newman's doctrine is a principled one, so that he speaks of maintaining the vigor of the gospel, for instance. He speaks of conserving the past. He speaks of continuity of principles and anticipation of the future. I've been involved in some bioethical arguments, and the slippery slope thing is very real there, because what you grant today on one matter is then used against you tomorrow on something else. So it has to be principled. And then, of course,
where do these principles come from for development of doctrine? Were they handed down on Mount Sinai?
development of doctrine is not the only thing, because that is when, in due course, teaching authority at an appropriate level, depending on the situation that has arisen, can be exercised to say, yes, but this is not a proper exercise of the development of doctrine idea.
I know Newman laid out ground rules, but they're Newman's ground rules. Who cares? Newman's just a guy.
I mean, I
This is why you go with Sola Scriptura.
found this in some of the interventions that Cardinal Ratzinger made when he was the
Not Francis.
prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith in relation to what people were saying about world religions. So, of course, Nostra Aetate has broken new ground using some of those ideas and using some of the work that scholars had done, but it does so in a principled way. And
part of the problem with this principle development thing is that you take small steps, right? And one step doesn't seem too bad after the other, but it's like shooting a space probe to let's say Neptune. A small error here up front is going to be a huge error all the way down. So if you have a little step here, a little step here, a little step here, by the time you get to the end, you can't point at any little step. And I keep using the death penalty. I know it's not a life or death issue, but you essentially have the Roman Catholic Church has taken, not dogmatically, hence they can get away with it with conservatives. But I mean, I hate to say this, but like you have a clear example of just something that's wrong. But they could use Newman's development to get themselves out of it or into it.
It doesn't go further than it should. So, yeah, I think all of these things need to be held in tension. And the danger is for people to think that development of doctrine can lead them to where the Anglican Communion has been led. And that would be really quite tragic.
Yeah, and there's quite a few movements. I mean, you're very familiar with the halls of academia and with the conversations that go on in members of the hierarchy and both on the side of the Church of England and on the side of the Church of the Roman Catholics. But there's been attempts to try and get the apostolic see, the church, the papacy, to confirm some of these things that would violate the authentic development of doctrine. And what we've noticed is that while there may be considerations, female ordination, homosexual marriage, even for
you need smaller steps to get there. But this authentic inauthentic thing, it's just made up because Newman made it up. He's not deriving that from he's deriving that from his take on history. It's subjective to begin with.
The doctrine of remarriage, and it seems as though the Catholic Church has always, even if we're going to the limits of mercy, they still have that nail driven into the ground of the constant doctrine of the Church. And so that's been
so constant. It's developed all over the place.
My experience, and that's what I've looked to for hope as well. So I'm gonna.
I don't mean to pick on them. My mannerisms, if you're not used to me, I'm more sarcastic. That's just how I am. I think they found a system they like, and they're just trying to project order onto chaos. And a lot of it is kind of subjective because they need the order.
Pass this back to
Well,
Michael.
could I
really
just comment on that before
Absolutely.
you do, Eric?
Absolutely.
The point is this, that bishops, and indeed the Bishop of Rome, if it comes to that, can define and declare the faith of the church when that is needed. But they cannot change that faith.
They cannot change their faith. Yes, they can. So anyway, I want to mention Justice's, I'm not sure how you pronounce your handle, Justas. Or just as. Anyway, look how some Catholic apologetics uses Acts 15 to disprove sola scriptura or something like that, or prove the magisterium or their kind of paradigm. So the way they kind of let me get my Nintendo Star in there for a little bit. Okay. So the way they do that is by saying that the Old Testament doesn't show anything, and it was just kind of made up by the apostles. And if they were just following the Old Testament, they would have gone with the circumcision party. And their reasoning is and I saw this first noticed this in How to Be Christian and how he was using Acts 15. I thought about it a little bit. They're going to use that same, if you verify that logic on how some Catholic apologists, I don't know all, but some Catholic apologists use Acts 15, they're going to completely use that for gay marriage. We've got new revelation, folks. By and large, they don't call it revelation, but they'll put the stamp on it. But again, the way I think it's going to play out is, I think at least their current strategy is not to dogmatically define anything. So the conservatives can say, well, you might have allowed gay marriage and gotten rid of the death penalty and invalidated the late in the mass, and you're quote tweeting George or James Martin. George Martin was producer for the Beatles. And all that. We have homosexual links on the hyperlinks on the Vatican website and blah 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 blah. But at least it's not dogmatic. That's the escape route.
So in fidelity to scripture and tradition, when the need arises, they can declare the faith, they can define the faith, but they can't change it. And so,
you mean like the death penalty?
So the sensus fidelium, which upholds that faith.
The sensus fidelium. Can I point to a sensus fidelium? What was the sensus fidelium during the Arian controversy? The sensus fidelium seems like a wax nose. You can move any way you want for whatever argument. I've heard it used for the Assumption of Mary. It's like, well, a lot of people believe in the Assumption of Mary. The Orthodox Jews have their own version of the sensus fidelium. Oh, all the rabbis agree with this, and God approves of the rabbis. Same thing. Similar thing.
Will continue to do so. I think that is very important to remember.
Thank you so much, Father Michael. And I'm going to pass it to the main host, Michael. And I wish you the best, and hopefully we'll get some other words at the end here. But God bless you.
Thank you, and you.
Father Michael, I'm curious, kind of in the same vein of the line of the last question. I'm sure you encountered a great deal of concerns when it comes to some of the theology and the agenda that you were seeing in the Anglican Communion. And I imagine you've also seen some of those same difficulties in Catholicism
Good
as
question.
well.
This is fair.
Um,
This is very good
what,
on Michael Lofton.
how have you been able to deal with that and see a distinction between the two communions on this matter, if there is even a distinction?
Yeah, I think there is a distinction. I mean, the distinction has to do, first of all, with a clear sensus fidelium that of
I don't think the sensus fidelium is very clear at all. It's just kind of what you want it to be. But
the faith of
can someone tell me what the sensus fidelium is at any moment in time? Yeah, are they running polls or something?
the church that is held throughout the world and down the ages. What Augustine called securus judicat orbis terrarum, the secure faith of all the faithful down the ages and across the world. I think there is a greater sense of that. I think there is a greater body of teaching.
You know what the biblical pattern is a remnant. We got 8,000 prophets who haven't bowed the knee to Baal. We got a rump of Israel left in exile. We got some Messianic Jews left over. Going to that's a waxing and waning. That's the pattern. Pattern is a remnant, not there was a sensus fidelium.
Teaching on the sacraments, on the nature of ministry, on all sorts of issues, which cannot be easily set aside.
Watch Pope Francis easily set this aside.
And then, of course, there is
well, maybe not easily, but with the methodology I've already laid out in this video.
The magisterium of the church, which is the bishops gathered together in communion with the Bishop of Rome, who from time to time
are nominated by Pope Francis, and the vast majority of them are going to be voters for the next Pope are going to be from Pope Francis. If Pope Francis is the current Pope, I wonder what this next Pope is going to be like.
Decide on matters of great importance. And if it comes to it in the form of a council. So I do think the Second Vatican Council was a landmark in the way in which it preserved what is essential for the church, but also opened the windows as good.
Pope, he's pro-Vatican II, so let's talk about no salvation outside the church.
Pope John the 23rd said to the world in many, many creative ways. I mean, I'm not, as Eric was saying earlier, I'm not against discussion and debate and exploration. In a healthy church, that should happen. I think somebody once asked Fulton J. Sheen about liberals and conservatives in the church, and he said, there are no liberals and conservatives in the church. There are simply shepherds and fishermen. So the shepherds watch the flock, and the fishermen launch out into the deep. Well, I mean, as long as that's all it is, that's fine. But the result of the explorations may be that authority needs to say, yes, but you can't go further than this. Again, as I say, not prematurely, but from time to time, that is needed. The Anglican Communion has no such mechanism. I mean, on the question of synodality, for instance, I mean, I have some experience of synods, and I don't want to repeat it. There is a proper view of synodality in the church, of walking together. And that has to do with consulting people, certainly, listening to them, of course. But as the Council of Jerusalem in the Acts of the Apostles shows us quite clearly, there comes a time
when James, the Bishop of Jerusalem, makes the final decision.
when those who have this responsibility declare what is the faith of the church in this or that matter. And not everyone has the same responsibility. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not against a proper synodal process, provided that these things are safeguarded.
So did it trouble you when you were discerning Catholicism to see some of those problems in the Catholic Church, or when you ended up,
Remember, this guy converted when Francis was Pope.
becoming Catholic, you already had seen these things and came in both eyes open?
Yeah, I mean, these things are not different from how other churches are experiencing them, but the other churches don't have that equipment that Eric was talking about.
We also don't have a single point of failure.
Right.
And we can also correct ourselves. And we can also don't have to be hunted down, figuratively speaking, at least now, this day and age. Right? We can just say, let's go our separate ways. And be at peace. And keep our property. And just allow the gospel to be preached. So if one part goes south, the whole doesn't have to go south.
Earlier.
Again, always the benefits of centralization, never the problems. Always the problems with decentralization, never the benefits. Like how they dealt with China. How China, I have an article, I actually have a video back when my production quality was even worse than it is now. There's an article in the Atlantic where this Communist Party of China is having a harder time dealing with Protestants because they're decentralized.
The equipment to deal with these difficulties, and we have to pray that equipment is actually exercised and not left in abeyance.
Yeah, the way I've likened it's kind of like a bear is coming at both of us, and one of us represents the Catholic Church, another one of us represents another communion. Well, the Catholic Church has a gun, and so that bear's coming at it. It can shoot the bear if it chooses to. The guy next to him, who represents another Christian communion, has no gun, so he has no chance. Now, it's possible that the Catholic Church will choose not to pull the trigger, but it does have that mechanism to defend itself, whereas the next guy doesn't have that. And I think that's the fun.
My session can excommunicate people. So I don't know what you're talking about. And we can rule on stuff. It's just at the local level. And my presbytery can do the same. And I'm in the PCA. The PCA can do the same. And if a church doesn't like it, they can leave. Now, this might be ironic, since you guys, I keep mentioning this tonight, but I do it because it's a clear example. But I don't mean I mean this in a different context tonight. What you really need is the ability to kill heretics. You don't have that ability anymore. So you don't have the gun for the bear. The bear is going to stay. And that's just the truth of it. All right? Yes, you can do it for a bigger organization. And that's good if your king is good. If your king is bad, it doesn't work. Or it might be good for one thing and not another. Again, not a fair assessment of pros and cons. They don't understand this. They want the benefits of the centralized authority without recognizing the negatives of the centralized authority.
Fundamental differences, the magisterium, as you noted. So I think that's a really good point. So let me also ask this, and then I want to pass it one last time for one final question from William, a final question from Eric, and then we're going to get to just a few chat questions. So one more question. What was it like going from an Anglican bishop to a Catholic priest? What was that process
I don't
like?
care.
I suppose it is difficult when it happens. I mean, it's still happening in a way. I'm not finally where I may end up in whatever I'm asked to do. But that's good for us. I think it's good to take stock and to give
I don't
up
care for
those things
purposes of
that are
this video.
simply incidental
Mhm.
To the faith of the church, and to acquire and to keep those that are essential. It's I mean, one of the dangers for Anglicans particularly is that all that will be left is the dressing up.
Mm.
You know, that is not the faith of the church. I mean, the faith of the church can be held and promoted without any of that. So anyway, it's a continuing experience, Michael, and we'll see how it goes. But I need your prayers, of course.
Absolutely. We're definitely going to be in prayer for you, and I would ask that you pray for us as well. Thank you so much for answering my questions. I want to pass it to William for, again, a final question from him, a final question from Eric. And then everybody go ahead and start putting chat questions in there now. Make sure to send it to @Reason and Theology so I know it's your question. But yeah, William, final question there.
Thank you very much for that, Michael. And I've what a fantastic time that we've had here with you, Father Michael. I'd like to go right back to what you were talking about earlier, because I know it definitely interests myself, Eric, Michael, because we're heavily involved in apologetics. And we're living in a time where the necessity is at an all-time high. So my final question to you, and I'll pass it over to my brother Eric, would be, what is the major need that we have right now in that field of apologetics? What do you view as the number one, or perhaps one of the main areas that we must do to focus upon in that world of apologetics? Is it preaching the gospel? Is it what is it exactly? What recommendations do you have as well for people tuning in that say, well, you know what, Father, I've never delved into apologetics. What do I need to do to help, or what can I do to help the church? Just your thoughts on that, Father.
Yeah, I think the first thing is, who is Jesus Christ? Because it is on the estimate of who Christ is that everything stands or falls. So I'm sometimes invited to follow another religious tradition, for instance. And my answer has always been a very simple one, which is, show me someone to follow like Jesus and I will. And no one ever has, of course. In the West, I think the main question that apologetics has to address is about the human person. So what we have now in the West is constructivism gone mad. So you make everything in your own image according to your own needs and your own desires. Whereas the teaching of the Bible and the church has always been that things are as they are because God created them that way. And that relates to human identity, to human relationships, to human responsibility.
This is not a no salvation outside the church kind of guy.
And unless Western Europe and to some extent North America understand this kind of realism, this is what the church's teaching is about. It's a realistic teaching about how things are, and if we live according to the way things are and we are, then we will flourish. If we don't, we won't flourish. I think those are the two main things I would say.
Father, thank you very much for your time. I have been very edified. I've been very blessed with you, with everything that you've talked about. And I'm very grateful that you've taken the time out of your incredibly busy schedule to talk to us. Thank you very much. And I do want to pass it over to my brother Eric now.
Bless you.
Yes, Father Michael, the last question I have is, what has been the response from your peers
All right, this is the
If
last
you don't
really good
mind
part.
sharing, of course. Are you getting a lot of criticism? Are a lot of people perhaps they say, oh, we understand, and it's understandable, or because I know sometimes some Anglicans, conservative Anglicans, they're almost fearful of coming into the Catholic Church. um they might think that they'll have the same problem there. um
That's a good assumption.
so what has been the response of those? I'm sure that you've gotten flooded with messages and emails, but if you could share, and whatever you can
Yeah.
share, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I think quite a lot of support, I have to say. Um,
A lot of Anglicans don't care.
the media in Britain, which is not known for its charity, has been reasonably positive, I have to say. Some Anglican bishops, the Anglican Church in North America, their College of Bishops passed a very supportive resolution,
That's a problem.
which I've got on display here, in case anybody asks. There has been criticism as well, of course, particularly in North America, from very conservative evangelicals.
Yay, conservative evangelicals.
Yeah.
Asking about things like justification by faith,
Well, listen
role
for
of
it,
the
guys.
scriptures, the veneration of the Blessed Virgin and the saints, and so on. But with due respect, I have answered them. I've got sort of some Q's and A's that I can share with you sometime if you like, on all of those questions and the Catholic position on them.
Oh, we would
But
love that.
yeah, what it showed me was that they hadn't actually considered all of those things. I mean, for instance, that the Catholic Church now regards justification by faith as a cornerstone doctrine which orients the Church to Christ. Well, if you don't know that, then what you're saying is something stuck somewhere in the 16th century, but isn't what is the case now. And Pope Benedict's work on Paul, for instance, his little book Paul of Tarsus, is very revealing. So yeah, I've tried to answer.
All right, what is he saying? He is basically saying we all are all in agreement on justification today. Hey, we're not in the 16th century anymore. That's a guy who's really ripe for converting to Rome if justification by faith alone is not a big problem and we're all teaching the same thing or whatever.
Some questions, I mean, where it is just prejudice, I've had invitations pulled, and
also very much sounds like a post-Vatican II, not a no salvation outside the church sort of dude.
The office space that I use and secretarial work that I had assistants for withdrawn, and things like that that are a price to pay, but I knew that would happen.
Yeah, if you leave a faith, there's consequences. If I'm on the Presbyterian payroll, I wish there was a Presbyterian payroll, but if there was, and I became a Reformed Baptist, and well, they might still be okay with that. But if I left, I'm not part of the organization anymore.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Father. And I think we'll pass it to Michael. I think we have an audience here, I think, who has a couple of questions. So, Michael.
Good.
Yeah, and we'll do about maybe 10 minutes of questions here, so y'all make sure to be very selective in what y'all send.
Good.
This is from Michael. By the way, thank you for the super chat. Based on your ecumenical experience, is the future of communion between the various Protestantisms and Catholicism relegated to individual movements, or is wholesale communion still even possible?
Well,
I don't want communion, so no. Not until I'm dead. Is this even possible?
I mean, Protestantism is not a monolith. I think that's the first thing to recognize.
Yeah, you didn't believe in justification by faith alone, or didn't think it was important, or thought we teach the same thing.
And
While you're an Anglican,
there may well be corporate elements within some of these churches that desire, well, I know that is the case, desire fuller communion with the Catholic Church. That has to be worked on. So, for instance, the Anglican Church in North America, which separated from the Episcopal Church, is very desirous of ecumenical dialogue on the question of corporate union with the Catholic Church. And I hope that the Catholic leadership in the US encourages that. So there will be elements, but I think wholesale denominational union
I'm
in the
skipping.
kind going to happen. There are now Catholic Church has to people in the Vatican that what they need to think to be the Catholic for the sake of friend persecution of Christians, that kind. Also, there must be room for dialogue with those people who in many ways share the faith of the Catholic Church and want to make progress towards fuller communion with the Catholic Church. And
Not a no salvation outside the guy church. He fits in with a Vatican II church to a T.
differentiated, an articulated
Conservative
sense
wing,
of
but
differentiated dialogue can deliver on that.
1920, this guy's a modernist heretic.
Ben asks, who is your favorite?
Well,
Don't care.
Certainly different. Henry Chadwick was called by experience, but yeah, I think those people certainly.
Excuse me, I'm getting over sickness here. Bully asks, Father Michael, what would realistically happen to the Church of England? Will it crumble from the inside, or will it be forced to pick a side, for example, among Catholics?
We're not talking about his conversion anymore. Okay, we're done. All right. I hope that was edifying. If you're new to my channel, get used to my snark. I don't mean mean. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to all these folks. Eric from this was in our live chat. Thank you for coming in. No, I don't need to do live interaction with everybody. So, but if you ever want to chat about something worth chatting about, hit me up, agoyforjesus@gmail.com. Okay, and that's for anybody, or leave something in the comments. And I don't see any interaction in the live chat anymore, so we are out. Have a good night. God bless, and have a good week.